Hello and welcome back to the Romantasy Readers Podcast. I'm Allie and I'm here with the lovely Nicole. How are you doing today, Nicole?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm extremely excited for today's episode. So,
I am too. Today's episode is an exciting one. For you listeners, if you haven't found out by the title of this episode, we're doing our first deep dive on a theory. And this is a crazy deep dive because this deep dive, do you want to tell them, Nicole? This is you were the first one to
this,
believe in this
I
theory.
know, I know. This is my baby. This is my baby. And we're bringing it here because there's so much information. And I just want you guys to have an opportunity to hear all this. I'm like, can't keep this hidden. We have to talk about Bryce-Real. We have to talk about Bryce and
Azriel.
Azriel and why they are a very strong chance of being endgame for Crescent City, for Twilight of the Gods, for the next 5 books of Sarah J. Maas. Now, I know that so many of you are either not into this theory, into Elreal or into Gwynreal, or, there's not a lot of love. Either you don't know about it or you might just love a different couple, and that is totally fine. I would encourage you to stay and really be part of this podcast, this one today, because we are bringing a lot of evidence that is in the books, that is in Sarah J. Maas background, theories and shows that she loves, lots of different things. And whether it's this theory or a different theory, you may find this information really valuable
Yeah.
for your own theories as well. So I would recommend that you
Yeah.
stay and listen it out. You don't have to love them by the end of it. We might. It convinced us, but it may not convince you, but there is definitely some really interesting information. And we're going to deep dive into Sarah J. Maas in general.
Mhm. So let's just be clear. The theory that we are positing today, and in at least one more episode, potentially two, right? We did not think we could even get all this in one episode, so it's going to be right now we have it outlined as 2 episodes, but it might be 3, maybe 4. We'll see. But the theory is that Nicole and I believe that Bryce and Azriel are mates and that they will end up together. All
Oh
right.
my
Now I'm saying
God.
it very
So
strongly because it's just
excited.
more fun to cause, drama, to be controversial. Obviously, yeah, Nicole's over here like she can't contain her excitement.
This is huge for me. Look, and
Yeah.
no, guys, 2 months ago, I had never heard of this theory. I was probably Gwynreal. I thought like Elaine and I mean, I like them in the bonus scene, but I never really I thought you can't have all 3 Bat Boys with
With all
the
3 sisters.
Archeron
It just
sisters.
doesn't
It's
work.
just too
Yeah.
much the same. We need something different. So I was going with Gwynreal, but I have been converted. I've been converted
Mhm.
because I love evidence. I'm a critical thinker. And this theory, to me, it's not a theory
There's
anymore. There is
evidence.
so much pointing to it that I'm really pretty confident. But
Mhm.
2 months ago, I wasn't here, and now I am here. And there's so much here. I just really want to bring it to you guys, just so that you have this information
Yeah.
as well.
And before you rule us out and think that we're crazy, which may absolutely be the case,
Yeah,
okay? And
little bit
we have
maybe.
said many times on this podcast, I have said many times on this podcast, I love to be wrong. All right. I love having crazy theories because for me, the fun is in exploring the world,
Yeah.
engaging with the world, having the theories. Like to me, that's what's fun. Whether I'm right or wrong ends up being irrelevant to me because I know that SJM is going to deliver a good product. And even if I'm wrong, it's okay. Um, but if we're right, okay, just imagine if we were releasing this podcast about like Reese and Feyre, right? And
Mhm.
saying that like Tamlin is not her end game. People would have thought that we were crazy,
Mhm.
but how satisfying would it have been if you had listened to an episode where we were like, Feyre and Tamlin are going to end up together. Okay, or let's make
Exactly.
it even crazier, right? Because some there were kind of some things that like maybe Reese and Faye were going to get together. People liked them. But like what if in after book 1 we had said like, oh, there's some Nesta and Cassian going on, right? Like how fun
Mhm.
would that be? So just
Yeah.
imagine how
Or like
exciting it will be if you listen to this now and we turn out to be right.
or let's jump into like Throne of Glass world. Like Aelin and Rowan didn't end up kind of having any sparks flying until the 3rd book. Like I always thought it was Selena and Kale. How do you say his
Yeah.
name? Like I'm so
I
confused
say
at this point.
I say kale.
Kale.
Kale?
No, I
Like
said
like
I always
kale
said
like
it
the vegetable?
as Cole. I always said
Maybe it's
Chol.
Cole. I don't
It's
know.
Chol, like Nicole,
Chol.
Chol. But
Oh,
Kale, I
that's good.
believe, is the correct pronunciation. So we'll use that. But I thought, like, when I read the third book, I was feeling really sad by the end of it because I was like, geez, there's some real chemistry between Rowan and Aelin. And now I'm kind of sad that she's going to go back to Kale. And then everything changed and my life, like, that
Yeah.
was the moment I fell in love. Like, and that is what I need from Sarah J Maas, is those moments
Yeah.
where she shocks you and she's like, oh, tricked you, here is endgame. And then I lose my mind. I lose my mind.
Yeah.
I'm in love. I
Yeah.
can't stop thinking about it. And I really do believe that she is bringing us something similar, if not even bigger, for her next couple of books.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, listeners, we're going to take you on this journey. We do not expect you to be convinced by the end. We just hope that you have a good time listening. And yeah, without further ado, Nicole, why don't you start by giving us like an overview? Because Nicole is the first one who really bought into the Bryce Azriel mate theory. I did not. We'll talk
Mhm.
about how I got there. But Nicole, how did you get there?
Well, I think I've outlined this in previous podcasts, but I'll share it again. That I stumbled upon this on theory on TikTok, and I thought it was hilarious. I just thought, who would think that? Two different worlds, like what? As if that's ever going to
Yeah.
happen. And I reached out to Ali and I said, "Oh my god, check out what is trending on TikTok currently, Bryce and Azriel." Like, as if ridiculous. So I was having fun with it. And then I was like, you know what? This will make great content. Let's get into this. Let's just go with it. I started just searching it a little bit. And then I started to stumble on a few things like, Shadow and Starlight and the sword and the dagger. And I kind of went, I'm like, they kind of blend nicely. Like Starlight and
Yeah.
Shadow. It's a really nice yin and yang there. It's not like,
Hmm.
I don't know, Starlight and Lightning doesn't really, that doesn't really blend nicely, whereas Starlight
No.
and Shadow really does, especially when you consider Dusk Court, which, like, both those things really resonate with Dusk Court.
Hmm.
So I started to have these little things to go, okay, there might be like a little bit of something in this, but I still thought it was a pretty far off theory. Then we got House of Flame and Shadow, and I got those first 25 chapters. As you know, I lost my mind. Like, I was reading this, the chemistry going back and forth between the two characters, the hand holding, the hitting her with his power and it feeling even more than what it feels like with Hunt. There was so much there, and I was just losing my mind, that I just felt like I was experiencing Rowan and Aelin all over again. But then the rest of the book happened, and then I fell into a deep state of depression because Endgame was happy ever after with, and I was just lost, and I was like, what is going on? I hate Sarah J Maas at this point because she's ended it with Bryson Hunt and it makes no sense to me. So I felt very sad. But then I stumbled across a group. I had a couple of people who are into Bridesreal, and obviously in my depression, I needed other Bridesreal people. So I sort of reached out and we ended up just creating a group. And I just said, hey guys, if you know anyone that wants to join, like, just add them in. And then these girls got added, and oh my God, I have never experienced the amazingness that was this group. Like, I've had other groups and they've always been a little bit cuckoo crazy. Like, I lose track of where they're at and I've just, like, signed off after a week or so. But this, like, it's like, I love it. These are my best friends now. So, first of all, these girls are extremely smart. Okay, there is one that's a doctor, there is one doing her master's, two are in management, one has 70,000 followers. Like, these are smart people. They're not, vibes readers or just people off on a crazy theory. These are critical thinkers. These are people that are looking for evidence, that are
Yeah.
saying, I believe this because of this evidence. And I'm there going, I can't fault this evidence. I can't fault it. Like, like, I'm trying to pick holes in it. And I do. I often say, what about this though? I'm like, can you explain why this happened? And they'll go, yep, we've looked into this and this is why we think it. And they'll give me like a 5-page thesis. And I'll just be like, oh my God, the amount of research that's been done. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And that was when I reached out to Ali and I said, Ali, like, look, I'm in this group. I'll add you in. I know you're not into Bryce Reel. I know you're not, but maybe, like, it's really interesting. There's a lot about the Princes of Hell, and there's a lot of, you might just really find the conversation really interesting. But, if you want to, like, sign off after a week of reading it, that's totally fine. And I might leave it there because then I might jump into your story and how
Yeah.
you got into Bryce Reel.
So there's really 2 things that convinced me. Initially, I was like, "No way, this is crazy." I literally even made, like, a story that is still in my stories, like, highlights on my Instagram, where I was like, "This is crazy. Would never happen. Like, this people who think this are nuts."
Mm.
Um, and 2 things happened. 1, Nicole added me into this Instagram group, and I was like, "Oh, wow, there's a lot of evidence here." The second thing that really got me is my biggest barrier was I just didn't think that Bryce and Azriel's personalities would vibe, that they would
Mhm.
mesh. And I've
Yeah.
said on previous podcast episodes that that bonus chapter where Azriel was like listening to her music and he loved the club music and he was like really into that and was like humming her music, that to me, and then like that, but then also just seeing them interact in the caves and stuff, and like that convinced me. I was like, you know what, they do vibe. So it's like knowing
Yeah.
that kind of my biggest barrier was their personalities, seeing that that actually wasn't true, and then seeing all of the other evidence, I was like, "Holy crap." And then and frankly, and we've talked about this a lot at this point, so we're not gonna hash it out a ton here, but I've never been a huge fan of Bryson Hunt. I've never
Mhm.
thought they were endgame. I kind of always thought she was gonna end up with one of the Princes of Hell. That
Yeah.
obviously didn't happen. But they also just, like, they were off in this
Yeah.
book. They were, we've
100%.
talked about it,
Mhm.
and that to me tells me, like, that I firmly believe that there's a different love story out there for Bryce. I've thought
Mhm.
that from the beginning. I still feel that way. I'm even more convinced of that. Sarah J. Maas wants an epic romance, right? Nicole and I were just talking about this
100%.
before we recorded. She loves these kinds of epic romances. There's more out there for Bryce.
She's a romantic.
Yeah,
You know,
she
she
is.
talks about that she loves Romeo and Juliet. She loves Sailor Moon. She loves so many different things that all
Mhm.
have to do with epic romances, even Star Wars. You know, there is so many different romances that she loves, and she knows what an epic romance is. She did not give
Yeah,
us this is not the epic romance. No way. Now, obviously, we think we're on the right path. Maybe there is a slightly different romance in mind, but I definitely think that it is not Bryce and Hunt. At this point, I am 100% convinced that they are not long term mates, love interests. I mean, I've truly believed that he's a made mate, that Hell have made him to be
mhm.
as similar to her mate as possible. But there's a lot of clear evidence that, which you're going to go into shortly, about
Yeah,
why the connection they have is really not that similar to other mates we have seen in her other stories. And knowing that
yeah,
these worlds all overlap, they really should be pretty similar. Like mates tends to be
yeah,
mates. There tends to be particular elements to those mate connections that are always there. And we'll
yeah.
talk about that shortly. But they're going back to that, sorry, just quickly, going back to that bonus chapter, like that, oh, that's my favorite chapter. Like that chapter I've read about 10 times. I love it
Mhm.
so much. But the biggest standout for me, I mean, yes, obviously there was the music and the vibing and that, but the last page of that bonus chapter, I think is really telling. If you think about the future story, it talks about Bryce stepping away from Midgard. She says, as the battery runs out on her phone, she sort of says, no more Midgard, no more Hunt. And then she's sort of left alone. But then she hears Azriel in the distance humming the music, humming Stone Mother,
Yeah.
and she sort of knows it's all going to be all right. And I think that's really telling about the story that's possibly going to come.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah,
I
that
just love
that
love.
that chapter convinced me. That chapter
Mhm.
was that was when I was all on board, was when I read that bonus chapter.
Yeah.
So, if you guys haven't read the bonus chapter, you should go do that. They're pretty easy to find online. I found them, there's an Instagram user, if you look her up, it's Court of Hurricanes. It's court.of.hurricanes. She has every bonus chapter, in a highlight reel, and then you can just like take screenshots of them and then read them. I have no idea who she is. I'm just plugging somebody who has great content out there. Um,
Amazing.
but go read that because and even if you have read it, like go read it with this new perspective
New
that like
take on
potentially
it.
there could be something
Yeah, see
between
what
Bryce
you
and Hunt
think.
or
Yeah.
Bryce and Azrael. Yeah. All right, so we're
Right.
gonna dive in. So the very first thing, like we're not just gonna jump into like all the reasons why Bryce and Azrael are mates, because we first have to kind of talk about like why Bryce and Hunt aren't.
We've got to
Um,
lay the foundation, guys. We're laying the
yeah, we
foundation.
gotta
We're not
lay
just
the
gonna throw it
foundation.
all on you at once. We're gonna gently ease you in. So allow
Yeah,
us to do that.
allow
Lay the
us to
foundation.
gently ease you in. So, number 1, I think Nicole and I both believe that Bryce and Hunt, at the very least, are not magical or fated mates in the same way that we have experienced magical or fated mates in other SJM books.
Yeah.
Bryce and Hunt fans out there could still think that they're chosen mates, and that's totally fine to think that. But I do think there's pretty strong evidence that there are different kinds of mates and that there's this magical kind of version and fated version, and then there's this other kind of chosen
Yeah.
version.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they're fated. Here are the fated or magical mates that we know about, right? Reese and Feyre, Cassian and Nesta, Elaine and Lucian, Rowan and Aelin, Rune and Lydia.
Yeah.
In every single one of these fated or magical mates, there is an instant connection between the two mates. Like, even for Rowan and Aelin, when their mating bond was magically tampered with, there was this instant connection. They couldn't stay away from each other. They couldn't stop thinking about each other. There was some kind of like
Mm,
attraction and tension
yes.
right away.
It just
And
it just had
don't
yeah.
I
It just
just
had
don't
the
see that
opposite
happening with Bryce
effect.
and Hunt.
Yeah. I think with Aelin and Rowan, it just had the opposite effect. I think because it'd been tampered with, they kind of hated each other more initially. It was like because they were fighting against it. I think they were like, why am I feeling this connection to this person? I don't like them. And they're not even thinking it could possibly be a mate because Rowan's there thinking, I've already had a mate.
Mhm.
I definitely won't have another one. And so he's actually extremely angry and confused by this. And I think possibly if you consider that Bryce is in a similar situation to Rowan, it could have a similar kind of impact that if you've had your mates kind of meddled with by someone, it can make you very, very confused.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Um, and, like Cassian and Nesta, they kind of had this instant Cassian meets Nesta for the first time in her father's former house, in the human lands, and they're like going at each other, like there's something there right away. Even Rune and Lydia. And the thing that I've been hearing a lot on Instagram is people saying, well, maybe Bryce and Hunt's mating bond is not as strong because the magic's been tampered with in that world through the
Mhm.
parasite. A lot of people have said that. It's a good argument. I'm not saying that it's not a good argument or not true. I think we have to really ask ourselves, how are things different because of that?
Yeah.
But we also have Rune and Lydia who are in that same world with that same like dampened magic, and they had an instant connection. And I mean
Yes.
instant connection, right? I mean, I don't think that had they not been mates, I'm not sure that Rune would have been able to connect to Lydia over the like mental bridge.
Yeah.
They sort of already know there's something about Lydia that attracts Rune. The other
Yeah.
thing I will say is in many instances, not all of them because of for like Rowan and Aelin, but in pretty much every other instant, the male immediately knows that they are mates with that person. Rhysand meets Feyre and immediately knows, right? He says,
Pretty
"At
quickly.
Calanmai, I've been looking for you."
Yeah. But does he click then or does he click when she's going back to the spring court? Because I know there was that moment at the end where they're like, she's going back and then all of a sudden I think he like
Well,
stumbles
so
backwards or
he
something.
said
I
that he
feel like
suspected it, right?
yeah.
Because he had been, like, dreaming of her. Like, he knew, like, that
Yeah.
he had seen her, and it's when she died that he really knew for sure that
Mhm.
it was her, which we'll talk about in
Yeah.
just a second. But he suspected it, right? He suspected they were mates the second he saw her in person,
Yeah.
which is that beautiful Calanmai, like, "There you are, I've been looking for you." We think he's just making that up to help her, but actually that was a genuine, like, thing for him to say, which is, like, one of my favorite things ever. Cassian is like he's known forever. He tells Nesta that at the end of Silver Flames, like I've known, like we're mates. Like Nesta can't accept it, but he's known all along.
Yeah.
The minute that Rune sees Lydia in person, sees the Hind, he immediately knows. He like
Mhm.
her scent hits him. He
Yeah.
is like, oh, something is happening to me.
Yeah. And I
Now the
think
same is not.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say the thing I think is really interesting between those two as well is they are phased from different worlds.
Mhm.
Lydia is obviously from Throne of Glass world. Rune is from Prithian background. So when we kind of go into, oh, they're, they maybe aren't as strong in, in Crescent City land, like they are from different planets and they've still had that level of connection. So I think that there is
Mhm.
very much that ability to have that connection in Crescent City.
Yep, yep. Even Lucian, right? As soon as Elaine becomes Fae, Lucian is like, "Oh god, that's my mate." Worst
Really
words to
just
ever come out of anyone's mouth ever, but
says
he
it
did.
in the worst moment. He's just
Yeah,
like, "Oh, you just came out of the cauldron. You're my mate." And she's just like,
yeah.
"What
He
the
really
fuck?"
shot himself in the foot, ruined his
Oh,
chances
big
there.
time, big time.
Yeah.
And they're probably the ones
And
that
oh,
some people would say, "Oh, they haven't got quite as much of a connection." The connection's there. Just at this point in time, Elaine's super fighting it. She's like, "Don't know if I want this connection. Don't know if I actually want to explore this at all." It's there, but she's sort of ignoring it, dampening it, squashing it down.
mhm. 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 And even Rowan and Aelin, even though they had been tampered with, right? When Rowan, like, finally kind of accepts that they like each other, and I think this is a little more vague to me because I haven't reread Throne of Glass, but I'm pretty sure when he, like I think he, like, bites her or something,
Oh my god,
and
that's
he's
my
like
favorite.
I know, it's such a good scene. I think that he, like, bites her and he's like it's clear that he's, like, freaking out. Like, he
Yeah.
knows that there's
Taste
some
her
kind of
blood.
connection there, and it's confusing him because he's like, "This feels like a mate connection, but I already had a mate."
Yeah, like, why does it
Um
actually, I love that you've brought this up because I actually think this is so relevant, right? Because that's such a good scene in Throne of Glass World, that when
Mhm.
Rowan bites Aelin, and I think when there's this mate connection, particularly when they're feeling frustrated with this bond, they almost wanna bite them, taste their blood, and I felt like
Mhm.
in the scenes in the cave with Az and Bryce, like, Az just keeps being willing to, like, cut the horn out of her back. He's just, like, dagger out ready, just like, "Let me
Yeah,
cut it," and it's just like, I'm
there's
just like,
that
"Geez, you're
tension.
really after blood, Az, like, really after blood," but it's kind of like, it's almost carnal. It's almost like he just wants to get to her blood. He wants to smell it. He wants to taste it. Like, I felt like
Yeah,
there was this, like, carnal desire underneath it all, that this desire to, as I smell and taste her blood, which I think was really interesting,
yep,
um,
and
and
is
very
missing from Hunt.
oh, yeah.
Hunt did not there's no sort of, like, instant thing on Hunt's side. There's no carnal, whatever. Um,
It's the
and I
boyfriend-girlfriend thing we've always
it's a
said.
boyfriend-girlfriend thing. Yeah, it
Yeah,
feels a lot like the connection between Kaol and Aelin, right?
yeah,
It's this, like, they clearly love each other, right?
yeah,
They had genuine and real feelings for one another. We're not doubting that, but it just wasn't this, like, magical mate bond.
exactly. They
And
have
the
this
other I
really
do
nice
wanna just
relationship, yeah.
yeah, I wanna address an argument or a counterpoint, because I think a lot of people would say, "Well, Hunt is not a fae, so he might not have the same, like, fae, feelings that, like, all these other fae males would have." My only kind of counterpoint to that is that we know that the Illyrians were the first kind of test for what the Malachim eventually became, right?
Yeah,
They said
yeah,
that they tested and that kinda gets confirmed um, when the Daglan or Asteri under the mountain in the prison refers to Azriel as, like, the slave, the
mhm,
servant. So we kinda know, okay, the Illyrians were this first test that Regulus
yeah,
mentioned.
yeah,
So if Cassian is sort of feeling that instant connection, feeling that instant, like, "Oh, this is my mate," it to me, it stands to reason that Malachim and angels could have that as well,
yeah,
especially when they're interacting with a fae. So, again, this may not convince people, but I think my big picture argument here is, like, the vibes are just not the same,
mhm,
like, the mate vibes are just not the same. Again, it doesn't mean that they don't love each other, it doesn't mean that they're not gonna be chosen mates, but I don't
yeah.
think that
And
magical
obviously
mate connection is
yeah,
there.
yeah. Now they obviously have a connection, and our theory is that Hell have made Hunt for Bryce, possibly to actually siphon some of her power and have some control of potentially
Mhm.
the Dread Trove, and to potentially be able to use some of that Starlight power, because basically during that weird intimate scene, he kind of draws it into himself. Then boom, he can use the Dread Trove, which is really interesting. But I think that, I don't know, like what you were saying, like the connection that they have. It's oh, like, okay, I've already lost my train of thought because I've just got so much going on in my brain that I'm just
I
like,
know.
it's
It's hard not
overwhelming.
to. Yeah. Well, and that's where it's so, like, the theory that we have, the reason that where we think Hunt comes into play is we have learned that in Throne of Glass that you can tamper with the mating bond and you can
Mhm,
create this, like, made mate.
mhm.
And that is what we think Hunt is. We do think that Hunt was made by the Prince of Hell to be a mate to Bryce.
Yeah.
Um, and we like I know that, Adis kind of, like, denies that, when she asks that question, like, "Oh, did you make us mates?" But he also answers it very fast and in a sketchy
Yeah,
way, like,
says
"Go
no
reread that."
really
He's like,
quick.
"No." And Bryce even comments like, "Oh, he said that really fast."
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Like, you're
I don't
lying.
trust him, and I don't think we have any reason
Yeah,
to
yeah,
think that they would tell us the truth.
yeah. And I think there's like this there's definitely like a Karanum kind of bond to them. Like obviously they can kind of
Mhm,
share
mhm.
power. And we've often said maybe they've got Karanum, but not typical mates. They can definitely share power. But there's the binding kind of rope light that most mates have had where they have this like string that kind of connects
Mhm.
them together. Like, Nestor and Cassian have it. Like they all have it. Rowan and Aelin definitely have it. He yanks on that power to keep her alive. There's a lot of connection to that, and we have not seen that with Hunt and Bryce. We
No.
and yeah, and just when she dies, he doesn't seem to pick up on that. Most mates have.
No.
There's a lot of those little things that most mates have picked up on that just doesn't seem to quite be there. That's why we've got this. There's something not quite right about this mates connection. And I think a lot of
Mhm.
people in that have read House of Flame and Shadow have felt this. They've kind of gone, this is really not vibing at this point. Like most people have now really cooled off on Bryce and Hunt. They're
Yeah.
kind of going, the vibes are not good right now. It either needs to be repaired or we need to explore something new because
Yeah.
it's just not vibing right now.
It's not vibing. Yep.
No.
And actually, I wanna expand on something you mentioned, which is, like, in other books, when mates have died, there is, like the mates feel that, right? So,
Yeah.
like, in book 1, Feyre dies, and then she can see through Rhys's eyes, and then Rhys says that's the moment he knew for sure that they were mates. But then when Rhys dies in book 3, Feyre feels it. When
Mhm.
Aelin dies, Rowan has this, like, physical, string that he can tug on to bring her back to
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And then, like, Azriel even tells Cassian that when they're, after Nesta and, her 2 friends who names are, like, escaping me for some reason right now.
Quinn and Emery.
Gwyn and Emery, thank you. It was like, "What?" Cassian's freaking out, he's like, "What if she's dead?" And Azriel's like, "No, you would know if she was dead, you would feel it here in your chest."
How does he know that,
Right?
guys? How does he know that?
Right. How does Azriel know that?
Isn't that a little hint?
Yeah. Bryce dies twice in these books. She does not see through his eyes. She does not feel any connection to him. He does not feel any connection to her. There is no tether to the world through her
Mhm.
mate.
Mhm.
That
Yep.
to me is like the most important and like biggest argument here is that she has died twice and there has been no tether through Hunt.
Exactly. Exactly. I 100% agree. Look, as you all
Yeah.
know, I've never been a huge Bryce and Hunt fan.
I haven't
I've
either.
never felt like their relationship is this epic romance that was really confirmed through House of Flame and Shadow. Hence, everyone's so confused at this point. And I really
Yeah.
think that, as I've said in the past, I think we're sitting at the end of a book that's equivalent to ACOTAR number 1. And that's why we're sitting in a
Mhm.
really uncomfortable space. Most of us, by the time we finished ACOTAR 1, we were able just to jump straight into A Court of Mist and Fury and get all our questions answered. Whereas now, this time, we have to sit in this uncomfortable space, hopefully not for too long. I have a theory that hopefully we're going to get the next book this year because she cannot keep us waiting for an answer for this long. She cannot keep us in this uncomfortable space.
No.
But I definitely think that that is sort of what's happening here at this point in time, that we are sitting in a
Mhm.
place that's uncomfortable and hopefully we're going to get a lot of these questions answered in the next book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you might be thinking to yourself, SJM's confirmed in an interview that they're mates, right? I hear that a lot. But didn't she confirm that they're mates? Guys, SJM lies. She has
Oh, yeah.
she
All
has
right.
done
All
it.
right. All right. I want to talk about this for a moment. All right. I want
Yeah,
everyone to imagine you are Sarah J. Maas, right?
yeah.
Imagine you have been working on a book series for like 15 years. And this is possibly your biggest series. Like we're talking it's spanning 10 to 15 books and multiple universes. Like you've been sitting on this. Like we know she's had a Pinterest. She's been
Mhm.
planning these books for years. Now, you have an epic romance planned and you have a 1 hour online interview with some, interviewers. Are you going to reveal your secrets in that 1 hour online interview that you have been preparing for 15 years?
N No, you're
Hell's
not.
hell's
You're
no.
not. And
Hell's no,
they
you're not
asked
going to.
her the question wasn't even like, it's not like she brought it up. They were just like, "Are Bryce and Hunt true mates?" And I'll
Mm.
tell you, I went and watched that interview, okay? When I
Oh,
tell you guys, like, I did my research, I watched a ton of
mhm.
interviews. I watched probably, like, 3 hours of interviews
Yep.
yesterday
Mhm.
preparing to record this. She pauses for a very long moment,
Yeah,
and then
she
she's
tried to
like,
deflect. She joked.
"Yes?" She tried to deflect, she made jokes, she's like, "Am I
Hand
ruining
through her
something that people
hair.
think on the internet?" Like, as if she wasn't aware of what people are saying on the internet. I mean, come on. And she's like, "Yeah, they're mates." Again, I also think that, like, that was after she had published a book where they confirmed that they were mates to one another.
Mm,
She could easily be saying, like, "Yes,
they're
they
made
are
mates.
mates they're made mates," right? In her head, she's justifying it, they're made mates, they're chosen mates, or whatever. Doesn't mean that there's not another mate, but
Mhm.
yeah, they're
Mhm.
mates.
Doesn't mean there's a
I
bit
will
more
also
complexity to this
say
story. Mhm.
yeah, right, right. They in that same interview, this is what gets me, okay? In that same interview, the next question, they asked her, like, how hard was it to hold the secret that, like, there's gonna be a crossover? And she was like, it was hard, but it wasn't as hard as holding the secret about Tamlin." And she goes into this whole thing about how people would come up to her on tour and be like, "Oh my god, we love Tamlin. Oh my god, are Tamlin
Yeah.
and Faye were gonna end up together?" And she would just be like, "I know, right? Tamlin's great. Yeah, of course they're gonna end up together." Right? She admitted
Yep,
seconds after
straight
that she lied.
after. Yeah.
Yeah.
What we've realized, guys, Sarah J. Maas is a terrible liar. She has some really
Yes.
obvious tells. So we were watching her previous interviews yesterday, particularly some when she was finishing ACOTAR 1 and about to jump into ACOTAR 2. And she was like, okay, so when she gets asked a question, she starts jingling her bangles. She's pulling them off. She's
Yep.
running her hands through
Yep.
her hair. She jokes. She
Yep.
looks like to the left, I think.
Yep.
She has
Yep.
some really obvious tells. And when you watch this interview, she jokes. She like runs her
She's
hands through her
fidgeting with
hair a
her
few
hair. She's fidgeting with
times.
her rings.
Yeah, playing with her rings. Like you can tell she's trying to keep a really straight face. She's obviously taking her
Mhm.
time to kind of answer the question to not give too much away, but it would definitely suggest that she is keeping secrets. She is
Yeah.
keeping secrets and she is
Yep.
keeping her cards very close to her chest.
I even found an interview yesterday, was gonna say the other day, but it was yesterday, where somebody asked her if Aelin and Kale were gonna end up together, and she was like, "Yeah." She's like, "They have a journey to go on, but yeah." Like, she lied. She straight up lied, okay?
Because
She
she wants
lies.
to. She wants us to have these surprises. She wants us to have these epic, she wants us to have those moments where we go, oh my god, this is happening. Like
Yeah.
she knows how special that is. We can't have that ruined in an interview.
No.
The most exciting thing for an author is to have those surprises for people. So as much as we kind of want to get a hint and know, it's like they're doing what they can to try and keep that a secret. Another thing that's really interesting, right, guys, and this is something we found out yesterday, Ali pointed it out. It's really hard to find that interview now
Yes.
about,
Yeah.
her saying that Bryce and Hunter mates. It's kind of been deleted in most places because we were like, can anyone find it? It's like, I can't find it. And it was just like, oh, wait, no, it's normally easy to find. We're like, oh, it's actually really hard to find now. Like, found it through someone's like Discord or something, like in the deep
Well,
realms of
and
someone's saved things. But
what I ended up being able to watch was not like an original version, but somebody who had recorded it on a phone, so it's, like, grainy. They recorded their computer screen, so it
Mhm.
was super grainy, and I had watched that interview before and had found it like, all I did was, like, Google it, right? Like,
Yeah.
and found it easy, and so it's gone from the internet. I found that really
Well,
interesting.
that's
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
really interesting. That makes
yeah.
me really excited.
I know, I know. The other thing I will say, and, like, nobody, like, talks about this, is so she's talking when they ask, like, "Are they mates?" She's like, "Yeah," and then she goes, "If they both make it to the end."
Yeah, she says, as long as, like, no one dies or
It's
something,
not yeah, if
which,
they both make it is what
you
she
know, we've
says.
got
It's
our
yeah.
Orion theory, we've got our Stone Mother theory, which we're gonna talk about at a later date, but a lot of these all
Mhm.
kind of point to Hunt maybe meeting a, demise at some point.
Yep,
So it,
yep. Now
is very telling.
there's one more thing that I found that I wanna bring up that I confirmed here. There is another, a couple years ago when I think when Silver Flames was coming out, but it might have even been, um, before that, she did this thing on Twitter called, like, ACOTAR Party, and so people could tweet her questions, in the ACOTAR Party, and then she would answer them, and someone asked her, "Could somebody theoretically have more than one mate?" And she was like, "Yes, they definitely can."
Mhm.
Now she might have just been referring to, like, Rowan, right? Because there's,
Yeah,
like, the maid mate and not, but I think, like, that in and of itself, again, is like, yep, somebody can have more than one mate. Like, you
yeah,
could have a maid mate or a chosen mate and your mate fated or magical mate.
yeah. Yeah. Look,
So
the biggest thing I have, look, I mean, I feel pretty confident about the fact that I believe that Az and Bryce are mates. But the biggest question I have is whether they will accept it. Because I guess something that Sarah J. Maas did talk about in the interview is that her next book is really going to be exploring their people's personal choice. With
mhm.
like when you do have a mate, you know, do you actually have to go with that, or can you, you know, go on your own journey and go against that and what that looks like? So my biggest fear is that the next book is going to be like, nope, I choose Elaine, or, you know, obviously there's the Elaine and Lucian. I know I've heard a few people theorize that they're kind of hoping it might be Emery and Moore who actually explore going against their mates, because Moore, I think, is potentially mates with Eris. And I think because she's been through that trauma, I don't think she'll want to be mates with Eris after this point. And there's obviously
Well,
a
and she's into
relationship there.
ladies, so
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think I know I'm hoping it's secondary characters that explore that, because I feel like for my main characters, I want them to be mates and I want them to end
yeah.
up with their mate. And I
Yeah.
actually really I want Elaine and Lucian end up together as well. I actually
I
think
do
they're
too,
really
actually. I really do,
I
and I love the idea that, like, they had a long journey to get there, you
I
know?
don't really want them to be the main primary source of the next book. Like, I really don't want it to be an Elaine book, because I just feel like that would be boring. But I mean,
Clumsy,
and
yeah.
I desperately need it to be as well. But I am open to like wanting to explore that further and seeing where that ends up.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
All right. Is there any other reasons so far that we haven't discussed that you have for, like, sort of why Bryce and Hunt are not like, why we should question that they're endgame?
I think we've probably gone over the majority of why Hunt is maybe pointed out as not her mate, but there is one thing I really want to talk about why I think that there might be something between Az and Bryce. And it's at the very big or very end of House of Sky and Breath. And this is the yanking, right? So Sarah J. Mass,
Yeah.
she uses certain language when it comes to mates, in particular about that mating bond. And it's always described as a yank, tug, or pull towards mates when they're yanking.
Mhm.
Now, when Bryce jumps in, you know, jumps to Akatar world, she describes it as getting pulled across, a yanking across, not a plunge, a yanking.
It said
Now,
that she's yanked across the universe.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Now, it's very interesting that she is yanked across and she lands right at the feet of Azriel, right at
Mhm.
his feet. I think this is very, very telling. She does not use the term yank unless it is regarding mates. And that is a huge hint that I think is there to suggest that there is a mate's calling here, and that perhaps as
Mhm.
feeling her yanked her in his direction and pulled her to Akatar world.
I think that's huge. I really do think that, like, language is so important to her and how she uses language to foreshadow things, to talk about metaphor, and I think that's a huge one.
She
So
has so many Easter eggs. Like, she does everything. This is why I love Sarah J. Maas. As hard, complex as her books are, there is all these Easter eggs and hints to everything.
mhm.
She uses particular language for certain things. There'll be so many sentences. Like, I feel like I'm back in year 12 literature. I'll read a sentence and then I'm trying to
Yeah,
break it down and think of what the second meaning might be of that sentence or what it maybe
totally.
means for the future. It's amazing, but oh my god, you've got a headache, like your brain's bamboozled because you're just like trying to think of all this stuff. But it's also really exciting though, because you can look at so many pages, break them down, and see so many hints towards certain theories, which is really
Mhm,
exciting.
mhm.
But
Okay.
let's jump into the
I
next
was Yeah,
stage.
let's jump into the next thing. So we've kind of laid the groundwork for why Bryce and Hunt maybe aren't total like, maybe
Yeah.
aren't mates, maybe aren't magical mates. Now let's talk about some things that are actually in the book, right? Like,
Mhm,
let's talk about the things that we read specifically in that first part, those first 25 chapters,
mhm,
because I think that that is really what convinced me. And there's a lot of little details there. We've talked, I don't think we need to spend a ton of time here. I think we can really dive into the
mhm,
Bryce and Azriel interactions,
mhm.
but it's worth mentioning once again that like we are seeing cracks with Bryce and Hunt.
Yeah.
We're seeing that they are not vibing. We're seeing that Bryce is like kind of mean to Hunt.
Yeah,
We're
they're not on
seeing,
the same page.
yeah, and I think in a future episode, maybe we'll talk about what we think are theories for like a really deeper dive on what we think is going to happen with Hunt's story. But we just like we're not sold that there's
No,
just a lot of cracks
no,
there, and
like,
I think that that's intentional.
this is should be in the last sort of book. They should have been, banding together to defeat the Asteri. And, if we had our typical Rowan and Aelin or Reese and Feyre, they would have been banding together and supporting each other and having
Yeah.
these hot, steamy spice scenes. Like it would have been an epic, like A Court of Wings and Ruin. That was not what we got with
Mhm.
this. We had fighting. There was weirdness between them. I don't know, I've just always felt like Hunt's been a little bit two-dimensional in his character. All he sort of thinks about is
Mhm.
Bryce, Bryce, Bryce. There was that
He has
really weird
nothing.
spice scene.
Yeah, he has nothing going on in his brain except Bryce,
Yep, 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 to the
which
point kinda adds to why he might be a bit made for her, to the point that he almost doesn't have a whole lot of personality himself. And then, of
mhm.
course, there's also future theories I'll talk about with, his control of his lightning, control of his temper, and whether we're gonna see something happen with that. But can I just talk about the really weird spice scene between these 2
Please
characters
do.
for a
Please do.
moment? Because
Call it
for
out.
me, it was super ick. Like, I love a spice scene. I would never flick a spice scene, and yet I was flicking spice scenes in this. Obviously, I'm mad keen Bryce, so for me, it was just like, ugh. I was just like, gross. I don't want to watch this. But then, much to my surprise, I found out that most people didn't like these scenes either. Like, I knew I wouldn't, but then no one was into them. Everyone was like, those scenes were super weird and ick. Like,
Icky
no
and
one
like,
liked
ugh.
them. How did you find it?
I felt the same way. I was like, I just wanted to get past them.
Yeah.
Like, I found myself
Chill.
skimming, I found myself, like, comparing that to, like, reading, chapter 54 and 55 where, like, it's like I literally I wanna move forward, but I can't. I keep rereading lines because 'cause they're so epic, and then I go back and like, just the initial read, I'll read a paragraph, and then I'm like, "Oh, I just really wanna experience him saying that one line to her again," and
Exactly. If we think
it
about Feyre and
yeah.
Reese, like their spy scenes, I'll read them on repeat. I'll go back and I'll reread just those chapters, just
Oh,
to
I do it all the time. I do it
yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
That was not the
It
case here at all.
it felt like they didn't have chemistry. It felt like it was at a really weird point. I
Moment.
found it being super strange that he, like, took his lightning into her or her power into him,
Yeah.
and that, like, that's somehow how he was able to then, like, wield the mask that, like, because he, like, took her power while they were doing it, like, that's just weird
Oh,
to
it's
me.
just weird. It really pushes to this thing that he might be a villain. Like if Princes of Hell end up being the
Yeah.
major villains, he just has the ability to siphon her power into him
Yeah. Yeah.
and then use it. And that's really disturbing. Like, it's not
Mhm.
like, "Oh, that's super sweet and nice." It's like, "Oh, that's kind of, like, weird." Like, that's not nice.
Yeah, yeah, and their spice scenes have kind of always been a little weird, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you've never gotten that really satisfying, like, moment that I mean, that to me, like, that is what makes a romantasy book
Yeah.
great, is
They're
the tension that leads up to that moment, and then the moment where they're sort of, like, accepting that they are mates or that they love each other or whatever, and then, the the spice that comes with it, of course, but to me, it's
Yeah.
more about,
I
like, the
mean,
tension and then the release of that romantic tension through,
yeah.
like, them kind of, like, accepting that they have a connection.
Yeah, well, I felt like there was heaps of chemistry in the first book, and I hadn't read any other Sarah J. Maas, but then they didn't do anything, which maybe is telling in itself. Can you really keep yourself off your mate? Like, I don't think you can wait
Right.
that long to keep off your mate. I bet if they
No.
are, we will see Bryce and Az get into it, especially with Kinky Az.
Yeah.
Like, at a not too distant future. Like, once they've kind of got permission to do it, they're gonna go for it. They're not
They're
gonna be
gonna
like,
go
"Oh,
for
I'm
it.
just gonna wait a year because I'm just waiting till solstice." Like, what the
Yeah.
hell?
No. No.
But then yeah, it's in a gym, it's in a submarine, it's just like rushed in a coat room like a what was it, the engagement? It's That's what I mean. They're
Yeah.
all weird scenes. I'm just like, I don't want a romance where they're just quickly going off for a quickie and we don't get to experience it and get the
No.
heat and the satisfaction. It just feels really, that's what I've always said. It feels really bland to me. And then,
Yeah.
as I said, in this book, it went from being bland to being icky, to being like, ew,
Mhm.
like this feels weird
And, like,
now.
Hunt was always a lot of people I didn't notice this as much when I was reading it, but I also was just a lot of it was because I was, like, speeding through their stuff because it was kind of boring, but,
Attack.
like yeah, unlike ACOTAR, but, Hunt was, like, always thinking about, like, having, like, a family with her, like, having heirs, but, like, using, like, creepy language, like, "I wanna seed her," and stuff like that, which is just, like,
Mm.
ugh,
Yeah,
gross.
yeah, which, like, again, if he's been made for her, like, the best way to hold her down would be to get her pregnant and,
Yeah.
like, because then that'd tie her down more and create
Or create more air like, more magic that,
starborn
like,
hell
then is
offspring.
controlled. Yes,
Ugh.
exactly, exactly.
So icky.
Yeah,
They
it's
cannot end up together at this point as far as I'm concerned. If that ends up being Endgame, I'm just gonna close off these books and be like, "I'm done, guys. I'm
I
done."
will
Like,
not I will be like, "These are, like, some of my least favorite books ever." Like, I will
exactly.
not be into it.
Oh, I
Um,
better change
but
at this
let's
point.
okay, we've hashed the Bryson Hunt thing. I
Mhm,
think listeners,
mhm.
you get it.
Yeah, yeah.
We're on the ick with them. Let's talk about the more fun stuff, which
Yes,
is the first 25 chapters of Hopas. Nicole,
yes.
what did you notice in the first 25 chapters? I'm just
Did
gonna,
I
like, leave it
notice?
open-ended and let you
What
just, like, go
what
on a
didn't I
tangent.
notice, Ali? What didn't I notice? I just absorbed these chapters like honey, like they were everything I could want. And I didn't know how, like, other people did not pick up everything that I picked up, but I guess my brain was a little bit this way focused, so maybe that's why I'd encourage people to go back after this, and if you didn't pick it up the first time, maybe go read it again and see if you notice these things yourself.
Yeah,
First of all, the first lines that Az says to Bryce once they can speak the same language is that he basically like talks about killing her, which sounds
yeah.
weird, but is a very typical mates kind of thing to say, to be like, why
It
shouldn't I
is, it
kill you?
totally
You know?
is.
Yeah. And even he picked up on what she was like, that she was lying and stuff. Even I think when they couldn't
Mhm,
speak the same language,
mhm.
he was like saying she's lying. He couldn't even understand her language, but he could just pick it up from her body language, her smell, just in those initial, chapters when Reese and Amron and that were still around. But then we jump into the cave scenes, which, oh my God.
Before
Yes.
you go to the caves, though, there's one thing that I noticed, and I was not reading this for Brasriel. By this, when I was reading it, I was not convinced, but this to me
Mm-hmm,
was like, "Oh, there's something here."
mm-hmm,
When she takes the magic bean
mm-hmm.
and she sort of, like, erupts with power, it says that
Yes.
Azriel sort of, like, almost, like, leaps to her
Yes.
with his sword, but to me, it's like again, it's that very
Mm,
fine line initially with mates between, like, "Do I wanna protect you? Do I wanna kill you?" Right? And I
exactly.
feel like that is like a trope that we get in romantasy, not just with SJM mates, but just generally
Definitely.
in romantasy, that there's this like fine line between that. And I really read that as being like, oh, like Azrael's kind of like jumping towards her, almost
Yeah.
as if like he
Yeah.
wants to kind of like protect her, but
Exactly.
also
Like
maybe
he's
protect the family.
conflicted
Like
himself
he's
with,
having this
he's being
visceral
drawn
carnal
to
reaction
her.
that he doesn't
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, he's being drawn to her and he almost can't tell himself whether he's trying to defend
Yep.
her, protect her, or like protect everyone else. But either way, he just feels drawn to her and he's getting close to whatever he needs to do. And we've definitely seen that with other mates. I was just
Mhm.
thinking then, I was just remembering back to when Rowan and Aylin first met and she's like drunk and dirty in the alleyway and
Yeah.
he meets her and like his initial lines to her were like loathing. Like he was just
Yeah.
like it was just the best. But like they
Yeah.
hated each other initially, loathed
Mhm.
each other. And we got a very similar vibe here, but I think that's such a good pickup. There was definitely,
Mhm.
and I think for a lot of readers, a lot of people could have seen it and said, "Oh, he's just defending Reese and Amryn, and this is a weird intergalactic fae, and he doesn't know." But he's so drawn to her, constantly just has to be close to her and can't explain why. So yeah, definitely a good pickup.
Mhm.
Yeah, which I
And
think,
afterwards, it says that, like, he's watching her even more closely and intently as if, like, he's maybe noticed something and is, like, sort of like, "Why am I feeling this way?"
oh, exactly. Oh, so much of that, especially in the bonus scene.
Mhm.
But then we get
Mhm.
into the caves,
The
and in the
caves.
cave, so after, let's go past the part where, like, I don't know what she erupts with, like, her light, and then there's like shadows, and she kind of fights them off, and they end up being Az's shadows that she ends up fighting, which I think he's very shocked by because his shadows don't normally get overpowered by anyone except Bryce.
Yes. Yeah.
But we get a huge amount of hand holding, right? Now, think
And
about,
touching, not just
yeah.
hand-holding, touching, physical
Mm.
touch.
All
Yeah.
the time. Can't keep his hands off it, basically. Now,
No.
remember, Az doesn't touch people. He does not even want to hunt Feyre when she admits that she's pregnant. He doesn't like touching people. He feels
Mm-mm.
like, and when in the bonus scene with Elaine, he does touch Elaine, but he talks about ruining her beautiful skin with his scarred hands. Like he's thinking about it, like, oh, I shouldn't touch her, but I sort of can't help myself. Like, because he's got these scarred hands. With Bryce, he can't keep his bloody hands off her. He's just holding her
No.
hand, he's touching her. Like Nesta's got the mask on and he's pulling her to his chest and pulling her away. Like he cannot stop touching her. And this is a huge, huge aspect. And I will go into this later in our next episode. We're going to jump into Sailor Moon, but a big connection to Sailor Moon is that romance starts with a lot of hand holding as well. So I think hand holding is a huge factor for mates. Another huge thing with the hand holding, which happens later, is when they're going through the prison. Now, during the prison, we have seen all mates have ended up holding hands with their mate. So Cassian insists on Nesta holding his hand through the prison. Reese
Yep.
insists on Feyre holding his hand through the prison. And what
Yep.
does Az do? Az holds her hand all the way through the prison. Like, I was losing my mind when I read this because it was like
Yeah.
10 minutes of hand holding. I was like, this
Yeah.
wasn't just a quick, oh, just let me grab your hand and pull you through this doorway. It was like, oh, let me hold your hand for the following 10 minutes and not let it go. As a matter of fact, I might grip it a little tighter.
Yeah. Well, and it says that, like, literally I was, like, rereading this section. I can't remember the exact language, but it was something along the lines of, like, he looked at her and he, like, held out his hand and he was like, "Okay, let's go. Let's go in there." And he, like, takes her hand and they go in together. And it's like, "Oh, that's a big deal. That's a big metaphor." Like, they're going to the prison holding hands. What's also so interesting to me, one, like, yes, like, Azriel does not touch people. He cannot keep his hands off of Bryce, like, pretty much the whole time. Bryce just, like, holds his hand.
Yeah.
She doesn't call him an alcohol. She doesn't, like, she does, like, that also is crazy to me. That is not
Yeah.
Bryce. Like,
I know, it's not
Bryce
just
doesn't
Az's
ever, like,
behavior changing, it's also Bryce's. And this jumps into the alpha hole part of this story. So there's the scene where Bryce falls over and Az grabs her and says, like, oh, you have to be more careful. And Bryce is just like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll try and be more
"Oh,
careful.
I'll be more careful."
Then later in the book, same thing happens and it's Hunt. And she's like, get off me, alpha hole. Like,
Yeah.
back to being sassy Bryce. And it was just like the contrast of these two things. Like when she's with Azriel, she's a love little sick puppy. She's just like, oh, okay, yeah, no worries. Okay, I'll try
Yeah,
and be
we'll
better
just hold
next
hands
time.
in the prison. This person that I've never met, I'll just hold your hand through the prison, and you can just you can just protect me from Nesta, and you can just, like, pull me to your chest,
I know,
and
I know, like, where
I'll
she's
just go
normally
with it.
so about women's power and calling them an alpha
Yeah.
hole and everything, when it comes to Az, that just all kinda disappears out the window. She's just kind of like,
Uh-huh.
"Yes, this is fine,
Yeah.
I'm fine with this." I mean, I would be the same way with Az, I mean, I'll admit, like, I would, yeah, as if I'd ever say no to him rescuing me,
Yeah.
but this is very different behavior for Bryce and her typical
Yep.
personality. We see a real
Yep.
shift in her personality when she is around Az, which again, I think is really telling, and of course, Az's behavior massively changing between her, when he is around Bryce. Like Nesta is looking at him like, what the hell is going on? Apart from the fact in the bonus scene, he's just staring at her sleeping. And Nesta's like, were you staring at her sleeping? He's like, that's just weird. And he's just like, well, now you've made it weird. It's like, now that you've said it,
Yeah,
you've made it weird. But he totally was. He was totally
yeah,
checking her out sleeping. You don't normally check people out sleeping unless you're kind of in love
no,
with them. Like, let's
no.
just call that out.
Or you're
And
trying to or you have this weird connection with to them that you don't understand, and you're trying
exactly,
to,
you're
like,
kind of
ruminate
looking
on
at
it
them,
and figure it
trying
out.
to figure out. You're like, why am I feeling this connection to this girl? This is really, really weird. But I
Yeah.
think that their their personalities around each other really change. Like, obviously, you see it most in Az. Everyone's like, oh, we saw more of Az's personality than we ever saw before in this book. Yeah, because of Bryce. Like,
Yeah.
Nesta would be there like, oh, he'll never answer your questions. And then he just answers the
He
questions.
just
And she's
answers
like,
them. He talks about his mother.
yep, yep. He just opens up, just starts to open up.
He talks about his mother. Feyre could not get that out of him. Nesta could not like, Nesta was, like, in that scene when he, like, talks about his hands getting scarred and talking about his mom and, like, his father, Nesta is looking at him like, "What is going on, dude? Like, you do not talk about these things."
Yeah, yeah.
That
And
is just nuts to me.
exactly. It is nuts. And I mean, and I love it because, okay, obviously I feel like first there's a mate's connection that's opening him up, but it's also Bryce's personality complements Az's so much.
Mhm.
She's this bright, out there, crazy, sometimes immature character. And that she really obviously opens people up. And Az is this quiet, moody, mysterious shadow daddy that we all love, but we really don't know much about him at all. And
Mhm.
to just see those two, we didn't know if they were going to vibe before this book, but then seeing them vibing so well, where as it's coming out of his shell, Bryce is almost calming down a little bit. She's being actually
Mhm.
almost a little, well, I mean, apart from when she's like running away from them and things, she's being more rational. She's sort of, yeah, she's just calm, as I say. She's not calling them alpha holes and things like that so much. We're seeing a
Yeah.
nicer side of Bryce. They're both making each other better. And I think that's a
It
huge thing of any relationship.
it feels a lot like Aelin and Rowan. You've got
Does,
Aelin who was this, like, super feisty, secretive, doesn't tell anyone her secrets, doesn't, in many ways is like Bryce in that she's just, like, makes these plans and doesn't tell anyone about it, and then you've got Rowan in the beginning who was, like, stoic, and wouldn't talk to her and, like, wouldn't say
no,
anything, like, that it feels
exactly,
very similar. There's a
exactly.
couple other things that I noticed
Mhm,
from the caves as well that I wanna make sure I bring up. The first is that actually before Az even reveals himself, and this is something I caught just, when I was rereading this earlier today, like, Bryce keeps seeing and feeling shadows. She keeps being like, "I feel watched. I feel like there's shadows
yeah,
there. I feel like something's here."
mhm,
And it's easy, it's easy to just blow that off and be like, "Oh, Azriel was there, Bryce just caught on to it." But what we have to remember is that Azriel has been spying for 500 years, and people
mhm,
don't notice the shadows.
no,
He is often in the room and people do not know it, right? And is hiding and people don't feel it. So I think it is really interesting that Bryce would feel his shadows and be aware that somebody was watching her, be aware that, like, there's a presence there
yes,
that other people have not been able to catch on to.
yeah, yeah.
That's really
And
interesting to me.
yeah, and I love that you brought that up because I think that ties into how much these two are equals in their power and their ability.
Mhm.
That, like he's the master of secrets and she's the master of lies. Like in both
Yeah.
both of them in their
Yeah.
own worlds, everyone's like, nah, can't beat nah, can't beat Bryce. Like Hunt will just be there like, whoa, I never saw that coming. Who would have known Bryce had really thought that underneath it all? She'd been lying to us the whole time and she had this secret
Yeah.
agenda.
Yeah.
And for Az, everyone's like, oh, he also always has a secret agenda. Like that, he knows what's going on before everyone else.
Mhm.
He's sussed everything out. He's those two things firstly complement each other so well. But then to think this is the first time, this is why there's so much banter because they're on equal sidings. Like he's kind of figuring out the secrets, she's lying, and he's trying to figure out her lies, and they just can't get one on top of the other. The other thing I
Mhm.
love that you pointed out was about the shadows. And I want to jump for a moment to talk about Bryce's power and when she gets hit with Az's power.
Ugh,
Now,
yeah.
such a powerful scene, right? And when she gets hit with it, okay, there's a whole line where she says, "Please don't hit my heart," and he says, "I'll try not to," and then he hits her with the power at the star. But she says, like, "Holy shit, this is more power than I have ever felt, even compared to Hunt." Now, the first flip might be, and this was kind of my counter argument, was to say, well, the power's less, important, it's less powerful in Midgard, so perhaps that's why it feels
She's a
different because of
parasite.
Prithian power. But I do feel that this is significant to Az hitting her with his power, mainly
Mhm.
because in the future, she has shadows within her power. Now, if we look at Thea's power, it only talks about starlight. There is no talking about it having any shadows linked in with it. And I think that that is a major sort of suggestion that not only did she get that power in that moment, but it sort of seems like a body kind of held on to it as well and kind of went, I'm just going to
Mhm.
keep some of this to mix. And it kind of adds to dust court, that whole thing as well. What did you think about this?
S the same thing. I thought it was super interesting that it felt different to her, and she says that it's not just that it's more power, right? It's not that it's just, like, stronger power, right? Which would if she was like, "Oh, this is stronger," that would the Midgard argument make sense that, like, "Oh, it's just, like, tampered or muted there."
Hmm.
But she says it's different. It's like,
Yeah.
"This is nothing I've ever felt." The
Yeah.
other thing that happens in that scene is that Azriel himself is like, "Whoa, I've never done that before."
Yes.
That, like, I've never experienced that before. Like, his power is also acting differently around Bryce, like, both
Yes.
of them.
Yes, their power, and remember, Az is 520 years old. Like, his
Yeah.
power doing new things is and this jumps into another part of this argument, which is about Az making something new with his power, right? So as I just said, he's 500 years old. He, like, knows his power inside out, back to front. He's used it 1,000 different ways. Like, he knows
Got all
his
his
power.
siphons, he's had to figure out how many siphons he
Yeah,
needs, like
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, so they're at the in the caves and she makes just an offhanded argument. Oh, you should like turn that into a rope or something. Like, have you ever tried turning your power into a rope? And he's like, no, I can't do that.
No,
And
it
she's
doesn't
like,
work
well,
that
you should
way.
try it sometime. Yeah. Anyway, then when they're fighting the Asteri, what does he do? He shoots his power at the Asteri and wraps it like a rope around their neck. He did something new with his power after one comment from Bryce. One
Mhm.
comment, and he went after 520 years and did something brand new with his power, like an epic different thing with his power. I think that
Yeah,
that's
like,
hugely telling.
I I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah.
The I wanna go back to something you were talking about, which is, like, talking about how, like, master of secrets, master of lies, like, they're equals, and kind of even connecting this to, like, the fact that Bryce is actually able to trick Azriel with the worm. To me, like, that's really interesting, and the reason I think she was able to trick him is because he kept talking about how she was bleeding. He kept noticing, like, "You're still bleeding, you're not getting better," right? And he never made the connection of, like, "Oh, she's doing that to lure the worm here."
Intentionally.
And I think he did that. I don't think I think he didn't make that connection because he was, like, worried about her because, like, her
Yeah.
scent of her blood was just, like, overwhelming him, right? Like,
Yeah.
he kept smelling it. Like, Nesta didn't notice that she was continuing to bleed with her heightened Fey sense, right?
Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
Azriel did. And Azriel, like, literally, like, cannot get over the fact that, like, it's not healing, it's not healing.
Yeah.
And he did not pick up on, like, what she was doing.
Yeah, yeah, there was a
Master
bigger
of
thing. He was
secrets
just,
that he
like, too
is,
worried about her. He's like, "Why aren't you
'cause
getting
he's too
better?
worried about her.
Why are you
Yeah.
still bleeding? Like, get better." He didn't, like, go, "Hang on, there might be something going on here," like, which is never Az. Az would never
No.
not pick up on something secondary, and that's, again, where they're back and forthing this banter. Like, some people felt so
Mhm.
frustrated by Bryce in this. Yeah, I just loved it. I loved seeing these 2 that had never met an equal and they were outsmarting each other back and forth. I mean, Bryce was
Mhm.
maybe slightly the upper hand in a few
Which I want.
things.
I
Yeah,
always want the woman to have a
exactly. The
slight
girl's
upper
always gonna
hand.
be slightly, slightly on top. But yeah,
Yeah.
you're seeing them banter back and forth, and it's just, oh, it was fabulous. It was so good. Yeah, I think that that's a really good pickup about, their power and how they're just not picking up like what the other person is doing and what that means. And that they've obviously got so
Mhm.
many emotions and things going on board that it's actually hindering how they would normally act and behave, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a huge thing that I think would happen with mates.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
Should we talk a little bit about the bonus scene? I know we've kind of touched on it, but I feel like there's, like, a lot in that bonus scene.
Oh, definitely. Actually, I want to just jump into one last thing, which
Okay,
is
perfect.
about how both these characters are super competitive, right? So
Oh,
something we
yeah, yeah.
know is that Az is super competitive, and so is Bryce. Az is known to, I think, have won more snowball fights than anyone else. Like,
Yeah, and he, like,
he's a
takes the snowball, like,
to another
battle
level.
very
Like, yeah,
seriously. Yeah.
yeah. Like, I think
Yeah.
Cassian speaks about it in one of the books, and he's like, you'll think you've nearly won it, and then you'll find out Az has this whole master plan going on that he's
Yeah.
had the whole time. So he is a master when it comes to like being competitive. And Bryce is exactly the same. And we see that when they go through the cave and then she tricks him by, what does she do? But she like sneaks in through the I'm gonna say portal, but like through the barrier. Like there's the barrier, and then like she tricks him and then she just slips on through. Can you remember
Yeah,
that
yeah.
scene? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's when, they're under the prison, they've seen the as or no, they haven't seen the Asteri yet, but they've seen, like, the center of the star, and
Yeah.
so Nesta's gonna go first because
Mm-hmm.
Nesta is made and can, like, the
Yeah.
wards kind of answer to her,
Yeah.
and so she's holding Azrael's hand still, right? Like, they're still holding
Yeah.
hands,
Yeah. Bryce and Ash,
and
holding hands.
holding hands, yeah, and she's like, "Oh, I just wanna, like, get a closer look," or something like that, and then she, like, points
Yeah,
she,
she's
like,
like, "Oh,
talks
look
about
over there," and then she's like,
yeah, yeah,
"Psych."
yeah, "Psych, I did it." I think she, like and almost, like, redirects his attention,
Yeah,
I think maybe with, like, the constellations or something, and then she
yeah.
just is like, "Oh, I'm in," and she, like, looks back at him, and he looks like he's like, "You bitch," basically, like, "You snuck out of me," like, um,
He's like, "You won
which is
this
really
one,
funny.
I am winning the next one." That was the best.
Mhm, mhm.
Yep. No, that was just like, yeah, I think you could definitely just see the sassiness in that scene, and they're both of them are super competitive, and they were just like, "Ooh, you just outplayed me," and
Mhm.
it's
Yeah,
like, right, and like, and they will
yeah,
both love that. Like, if you think
yeah.
about future relationships, super future spiciness, and that, like, they're gonna be
Mhm.
spicy as when they're that
Yep,
competitive. I
yep,
love it.
and he, like even though she, like, bests him with the worm, he, like, moves on. He's not like
Yeah.
Matt, like, he forgives her basically. He's like, "Ah,
Mm.
yeah, I guess I understand why you do that," and is like, "You did come back for us, right?" And, in that whole scene, like, we've talked about it, but I just, like I think it's so important that, like, he's, like, protecting her from Nesta. Like, when Nesta
Yeah.
dons the mask
Well,
and is
even
gonna
when
kill
he's
the
really
worm.
angry at her, he still can't help
Angry yeah,
himself but
exactly.
protect her. Like, he's pretty pissed at her at that point. He's like, "You bloody tried to feed us to the Midgard worm." And
Yeah,
then he's like, "Oh, but I'm still, like, holding your hand and pulling you to me and
my
rescuing
chest.
you and
Yeah.
everything else." Like, he just can't
Mhm,
fight his natural urge to protect her, which
mhm.
is a huge aspect of a mate.
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but no. So yeah, I think that's most of like that sort of covered for me at this point in time. I think we can move to the
Mhm.
next stage now
Yeah.
of the theory.
Okay, let's talk about the bonus scene.
Yes.
This bonus scene, to me, again, I said it before, I'm gonna keep saying it. To me, this is like the pivotal, like to me, this shows me that their personalities mesh and that there's gonna be something
Mm,
there. Like, and it's not just like I think it's super significant that he likes her music. And he doesn't just like the classical music, right? He
mhm.
likes the club music. He likes the folk music. He's humming the folk music as the chapter ends, right? And she feels like home because he's humming her favorite song, right? Her favorite song, and Az is humming it at the end of the chapter.
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
I'm sorry, but the metaphor there is just too strong to ignore. But
Exactly.
I also find it so interesting, like she has this moment where she's like, I could play music for them, or I could keep it to look at pictures of Hunt. And she chooses to let the battery die to play
Mhm.
music for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Ah.
I don't know. Like, I
Okay,
think
where
it's
do I start
there.
with this scene? Okay. Firstly, there is what I would call a meet cute. Okay, so she wakes up,
I love
sees
it. Yeah.
as sees as staring at her, and she jumps up, bangs her head on the cave roof or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Love it.
that is a typical meet cute, right? Like that she's banged her head after she sees him staring at her, and they have that moment. And then that leads into like Nesta being like, "You staring at her?" And he's like, "Don't be weird." Like, so that was that really cool little thing. But I love that there was that to start with. Then there's this lovely, natural, organic sort of conversation that then we see between Nesta, Az, and Bryce. I also love thinking that I think there's going to be a lovely future friendship between Nesta and Bryce. We have a theory that, there's a lot of connections here to Sailor Moon, which we'll talk about at a later date. But in that, Sailor Moon has these best friends. And I think since Danica has died, Bryce has not had a true best friend, someone that she could
Yeah.
just tell absolutely everything to, all her secrets. We don't see that at the moment when she's back home. She's still keeping secrets from everyone, including Hunt. Danica was the only person that she was really, really open with. And since then, we haven't seen that. So I think we see the potential of that with Nesta. And this kind of connection, we're potentially seeing her with her two best friends, with Nesta and then possibly with Az as a future mate partner.
Mhm, mhm.
And that natural organic. And then when they're just going through the music together and exploring things. And obviously, Nesta, she's into classical music and dancing. I still am hoping that one day we're going to get a dance off between these two because I
Yeah,
just
or
want
at
to
least seeing them
see,
both dance, at the same
like
time.
ballet and dancing, ballroom dancing. Like I just want to see them
Totally.
doing that together. It'll be so good. And that's how they're going to vibe, right? Those two are going to vibe on that. But then
Mhm.
when Az is into all the types of music, like you actually just see our biggest worry was that he wouldn't like Midgard whatsoever. We didn't think that he would be into that. And yet, lo and behold, he loves it. All I can imagine now is as walking into a club. Like
I
every time I
know,
listen to
same.
like club music now, I'm just like, oh, this would be a great Az song. This would be a great Az song. I can just imagine him walking into a club, all muscles and blue lights, and
Yeah,
oh my
yeah,
God, the charisma that's just flowing off him. I absolutely have to have
totally.
him in Midgard. I need that Midgard scene, preferably with him holding Bryce's hand and them being mates. But I've got to see it regardless. But yeah,
Yeah.
we just see his love of all these different types of
Yeah.
music, whether it's the hardcore rock that that Rune would like, or the clubbing music that Bryce would like. Remember Bryce, the initial scenes of Crescent City 1, she was at a club and she was dancing and vibing to the music. It's a huge
Mhm.
part of her personality and who she is, and it's very interesting to see for Az. That is a real similarity that both of them have, that they both love music. And as I spoke about before, that very last page is very suggestive of what the future may hold, and the
Yeah.
importance of the music and, yes, a future with Az.
Yeah. And we did mention this in our last episode, or maybe 2 episodes ago. So, if you haven't listened to that, go back. But, and sorry we're repeating ourselves, but it's important to repeat. SJM once said in an interview, and I actually found this interview and watched it yesterday, that if there's ever a character who doesn't like music, they're gonna be evil.
Be concerned.
And also is just like music is so important, like, so music is very important to her. She has playlists for things. She said like music, like if a character doesn't like music, that's important. I think it's important. I think we need to note that Azriel liked her music. I think that's a big
Yeah.
deal. And then when you compare that to the fact that Bryce called her music sad sack music,
No, he was listening
and
to a
kind of
podcast.
or Hunt called her music sad sack music, and was listening to a podcast and doesn't like music that much.
Yeah.
That's big. That's telling.
And for anyone that wants to add just a little Easter egg to consider, because Sarah J. Maas loves music, right? She talks about she loves all different sorts of music, but on her video where she released that she was writing House of Flame and Shadow. So it went from Crescent City 3 to House of Flame and Shadow. In that, she has a list of a playlist. Like in that, if you watch it to the side, she's got all these little things around her, and like all the fans are all pulling apart what was around her
Yeah.
at that time
What
and
was
what the
around her,
relevance was.
yeah.
Because just like Taylor Swift, she leaves all these Easter eggs for her
She
fans.
does.
And she
She
has a
does.
whole list of songs there, which are really, really interesting. They're really interesting as to like what it can hold for the like what she's doing. And she's, as I said, it's just, if you want something to go check out, just a little hunting that you want to do, go check out that video and check out the songs that she was listening to when she was writing Crescent City 3.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
I totally agree. Okay, so we've talked about the caves, we've talked about the bonus chapter. I think the last thing to talk about is the very end of the caves, right before
Mhm.
Bryce is going to go
Back
back to
to,
Midgard.
yeah, yeah.
And, something happens with Azriel. Nicole, do you wanna talk about that?
Well, I mean, only that, and tell me if I'm missing anything, but it's mainly just that she like takes truth teller from Azriel. Like she pulls it to
Mhm.
herself, and because she seems to have more power than he does over it. And then he's basically begging her not to leave. He's like, take my hand, let's go and sort this out. And she's like, nope,
Yes.
I can't. I've got people I got to get back to. I'll see you later. Like, this is not my
Mhm.
priority right now. And he's like, please stay. Please stay. Now, I think on first read you can look at this and think that he's just saying, there's danger back in Midgard, the Asteri. We need to go back to Rhysand and figure this out. Like you could look at it from that sort of shallow perspective and sort of say,
Don't
oh,
steal my favorite sword.
yeah, don't feel it's
You
still
know?
my favorite sword. But I think if you look at the undercurrents, he didn't want her to go.
Mhm.
Like if he's
I
felt this
agree.
connection to her, his body would be telling him, "Don't leave me. Like I yanked
Yeah.
you here with this cord. Don't leave me now. Stay and take my hand and let's go figure this out." And she doesn't stay. And I'm
No.
super heartbroken for Azriel. Like as
Yeah.
I've often said, I don't know what's happening for him at this point. He lost Truth Teller, lost Bryce to back to Midgard. He will not be in a good place if he really is her mate and he has felt this connection. He's going to be in a
Mhm.
very dark place following the outcome of this cave scene. But it's definitely a very pivotal point, and I think that there is a lot that is going on here. What did you pick up from the scene, Ellie?
The same things, it's mostly, Bryce notices his face. That is something that she notices. She notices that he
Always talks
looks
about his beautiful
like
face,
she's always talking about his beautiful
hazel
face.
eyes.
Yeah. She's like this beautiful man, like, she's constantly talking about how attractive he
Mm,
is.
mhm.
But she notices that his face looks, I think the word is, like, he looked, like, broken or, like, heartbroken or
Mhm.
something like that. Like,
Yeah.
it is he is, like, desperately upset.
Yes.
Not just like, "Oh, don't go." It's like he looks like he's gonna crumble is what
Yeah.
Bryce notices. And, of course, that could be because he's losing Truth Teller, which is kind of integral to who he is as a person.
Mhm.
I think it's because he's losing Bryce. I don't
Yeah.
know how else to interpret it.
Exactly. Look, I think it's both. I think obviously part of it is losing Truth Teller. It's a double whammy. It's a double whammy, which is just gonna crumble him. But this is like, imagine Az has never felt a mate connection before. And he'll be super confused already because she already has a mate back in Midgard and she's been talking about him. And he'll just be like, what the hell's going on? But to feel that after 500 years and everyone else having a mate's connection and not you, and then feel that connection to someone, and then they just jump back and leave you again. You have this moment of like coming out of your shell and experiencing something you never thought you'd ever
Yeah.
experience, and then they go. And he
Mhm.
is absolutely crumbling. And I found that last scene kind of challenging because Bryce starts being a real bitch to
Yeah,
Cassian and Nestor, and they're like, "Don't let out the Asteri," and then she's just letting out the Asteri, and and
yeah,
then she's just taking Truth Teller, and she starts to become very sort of you know, internally focused. I guess she's kind of like, "I've got a job here to do. I've got to do that. That's my number one priority. I just need to get back to Rune and hunt and rescue them." So she really gets back into that zone, but I don't know, I felt such a feeling of loss for Az in this scene. I felt
mhm.
a lot for him that he was losing so much in this scene.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Alright, I think that's everything I noticed from part 1.
Well, I think
There's other things in the book that I noticed, but what
yeah.
what else do you have from part 1 that you noticed?
I think that's pretty much it from part 1 because then we jump into other parts of further on down the book that maybe also speak a little bit more to some of what
Yeah.
sort of happened between.
Oh, you know what? There is one more thing from part 1
Okay,
that I
all
wanna
right, go
mention that
for
I
it.
just
Go for
remembered.
it.
We
We don't
didn't
want
put this in
anyone to
our
miss out
outline,
on
but
any important information, guys. We
we
want
can
you to
yeah,
have
we have
all the
to, like,
information.
again, we always have tangents. This is a conversation because sometimes things pop into our head. This just popped into my head. It's not
Yeah,
in our little
go for it.
outline that we made. But do you remember, and this may not be in part 1, it might be early part 2, but, the Asteri are trying to basically decide, like, who they're gonna kill to lure Bryce back.
Yeah.
Do they kill Rune or Hunt? Like, what's gonna lure her back more? And they choose Rune. They choose
Mm,
that, like, Rune is gonna be
interesting.
the one that, like, is more impactful to lure her back than Hunt. And that could be right, like, that could just be nothing, like, I'm not saying this is, like, the nail in the coffin on this theory or
Mhm.
anything, but I just think that that's, like, an interesting choice for SJM to have made explicit,
Yeah.
um, that the Asteri, at the very least, believe that Rune was more important to Bryce than Hunt.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And even when I was just saying the line before, I said she needs to get back to Rune and Hunt. I think I would need to confirm in my book that is sitting here right now. But I'm pretty sure it goes Rune and Hunt. It says Rune's name first. I feel like her
Mm,
connection was sometimes more to I need to get back to my brother than it was to getting back to Hunt. Hunt was kind of always there. Oh, and Hunt. And yeah, so I definitely think that is super telling. And I agree. I think that, yeah, her connection to her brother is definitely, insurmountable to what she is
mhm.
feeling towards Hunt. And it's interesting that maybe even the Asteri picked up on that and whether they know more than everyone else does as well. We
Yeah,
certainly think that the Princes
potentially.
of Hell might know a lot more than they're letting on about what is maybe in store for Bryce, but definitely
Mhm.
possibly the Asteri are also noticing that too. So yeah, I think that's a really good call out, really good pickup.
Yeah. It could be nothing, right? It could just be like, "Oh, they just know that she loves her family and she has a really great connection to her brother," right? But it's there.
But if
It's good to
this
point
was
out.
Rowan and Aelin and it was Queen Maeve being like, "Oh, I need to pick someone to, lure Aelin back," like,
Mhm.
first pick would be Rowan.
Would
First
be
pick well, I
Rowan.
mean, well, she basically has Aelin and she's kinda hoping Rowan is gonna come and rescue her so she can grab Rowan as well. Like,
Yeah.
you know, um, they just know that they're such strong mates that that is the person that that's
Yeah.
their number one. That is their number one
Mhm.
without a doubt. There's no one that's even remotely close to that person for
Yeah.
them.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
No, good pickup. All
Okay.
right. Part
What
2.
else in the later part of the books did you kind of catch on to that might indicate something with Bryce and Azriel?
Yeah, well, I think maybe we can jump into like, look, there's lots of little hints along the way, as we said. That probably primarily was that then we start seeing the cracks in the
Mhm.
relationship between Bryce and Hunt. This part of the book I obviously hated, and the first read I was just blitzing through it, going, "Where is Akatar World? You cannot give us all those 25 chapters and then give us nothing else. Like, what the hell?" But on the second read, definitely picked up some more points and hints that suggest, apart from just the cracks from Bryce and Hunt, that there is more to this than, what sort of meets the eye. So, one of the things, I mean, and I think we'll talk shortly about the hell scene and that being a huge aspect to that hell maybe know a lot more about this than we think. But one thing I want to talk about is when Bryce has to televise to tell the world about the Asteri, right? She's there with Hunt and they're going to televise it to the world. And when she does, she says, "My mate Hunt." And then only a moment after, she is like riddled with nausea and nerves. And then he has to kind of step in and then lead from there. And I thought this was really interesting. And I don't know whether it's anything more than just coincidence, but it was interesting that when she sort of said this aloud and said, "Hunt is my mate," all of a sudden she's riddled with nausea, almost like her body is kind of repelling against that and saying,
Mhm.
"No, he's not. No, he's not. Nope, that is incorrect."
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really g I had not picked that up when you told me about that, a couple days ago. I was like, "Ooh, that's interesting." Again, like, this is one of those things where it's like, this could just be a small thing. I think there's alternative explanations for it, like,
Yeah. Yeah,
she's
she could just
nervous
be
or she's
nervous
afraid
that
that
she's
he's
in
gonna
front of a
die,
camera. Yep,
but
it's a big deal, but I like to think that
when
there's
you
more to
take
it.
it with all the other evidence, right, on a whole, it's like, that could be something. That could be something.
That's it. All right, let's talk about the hell scene, all right?
The
And
health
you can
thing,
jump
yeah.
into this, well, because this is one of your favorite chapters of this book
It is
for
one of my
lots
it is
of
like my probably it is actually probably my favorite chapter of the book. Like my favorite single chapter. Like I love all of part 1, but like if I had to pick like a single chapter, it's
yes,
when they like
yes,
visit hell because there's
yes.
so much there.
Definitely. Actually, before we jump into that, there is a scene with Hunt back when they're being tortured. When was it? When Apollyon and Adis are there, and they figure out that Bryce has potentially gone to Prithian, and they turn to
Mhm.
each other and they say, "Don't fall into
To
romanticism."
romanticism. Yeah.
And we kind of go, "Ooh, what does that mean? What does that mean? Why are they like they kind of assuming that they know that Bryce has a mate, that mate is in Prithian, and she has been yanked across into that world." Um, our theory is that they know what's going on and they
Mhm.
know that she's just gone straight to a mate.
Yeah, well, and because, um, Bryce has Thea's light,
Mhm.
and Adis and Thea were like these, star-crossed lovers, right? They're
Mhm.
mates. They found each other across galaxies, across
Yes.
worlds,
Intergalactic
um,
love.
intergalactic love, right? And if history is sort of like repeating itself, Apollyon could be saying to Adis, like, don't fall into romanticism. Like, don't believe that like that she got yanked to her mate, just like, you know, Thea kind of found you. I think that's interesting. And so that really leads me naturally to the hell scene. The very first thing that happens is there's two blue orbs. And they turn out to be Adis's eyes, right? But they're not just like, oh, blue eyes. They're like these two blue strong lights that she
Lights.
sees in the
Yeah.
dark. What is Azrael's like power color?
I know, we know.
Blue. It's like blue
He's our
light.
blue, he's our blue boy.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like this actually made me think, and I've always wondered, is Az somehow maybe connected to hell? This made me think that Az is connected to hell, is somehow kind of like related to hell in some way.
Oh,
And that like that even makes the like don't fall into romanticism even stronger, right?
I
That like
know.
Bryce
Well,
found her blue light mate
I
who was
know.
connected to hell
Well, I
across the
think
universe.
yeah, what's really interesting is first the name Azriel, right? The name Azriel is the angel of death. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, is it hell, death? They're a little bit interconnected, and I love that idea that there is a lot more to Az than meets the eye. And yeah, so then the other sort of element is that what was it about Az? That he, oh my god, I've lost my train of thought. I've got too many things going on today, and I'm just
I
like, I have
know,
so
I
much
know.
to
There's so
say, and
many
then I'm
things to
just
think
like, and then
about.
I lose my train of thought about what I'm going to say about it. But what did you think about Az's sort of light and power, like when he first got, like when like Bryce and Hunt sort of first get to hell, and
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I thought it was super interesting that like Adis has the blue eyes.
mhm,
And then I just think I think that they answer questions really quickly, right? About, did you make us mates? Oh, no, 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 we didn't do that, right? Like that was really interesting. They talked about how like Hunt was kind of made for
mhm,
the the starborn heir.
yes,
Which to me it's like, okay, they're already tampering with magic and with this connection to the starborn heir. Why would they not tamper with a mate connection? And what's the other thing is like, how old is Hunt?
he's like
He's like
is he like 200
200,
and something years old? I think he's like 200.
right? Which means that Azrael was alive when they
Mhm,
were
well and truly,
making Hunt. And so I think it's really interesting that like maybe they tried to model Hunt, like his scent and his um things about him, like
yeah.
the connection off of Azrael. Like
They
maybe
kind of
they know that
say that
Azrael
they
mate.
a lot of their looks are kind of similar and that their smell is very similar. If you look up what they smell like, I can't remember, it's like pine and leather or whatever the typical smells are.
Yeah.
Most
And
of
that
them.
could just be because
Yeah,
men
but they
always
are
smell like that.
very, very
But they
similar.
are similar.
And
Yeah.
I think if Hel knew who the Starborn princess's like mate is, that is as they have really created someone that they could control that is
Mhm.
very, very close to the same as that,
Yeah.
which is really, really
And
telling.
Thanatos, I think it's in this scene. Thanatos says that her magic smells fresher,
Oh yeah.
that something about her smells different. And it's like, Okay, is it because, like, it's been invigorated by her true mate, right? Like, and he
Well, I
even says,
think,
like,
you
it
know,
doesn't smell like Thea's magic, it smells different, it smells fresher, it's really
yes,
interesting.
and I think is it Ada that then tries to kinda shut that conversation down a little bit,
He
but
does,
yeah,
yeah.
like, Thea's power is old. It's an old power. It's, I mean, kept underground for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And then, yeah, so that is not going to feel fresher. Whereas, and I think there's even a line in it about, you being hit with something that's making your power fresher. It definitely
Mhm,
suggests that, and obviously the mention of shadows, that it's a lot more than just that she has obtained Thea's power, that I think that it has something to do with Az hitting her with his power, and that has changed her power in a monumental
mhm,
way. Yeah.
mhm, yeah.
Yes. I remember what I was gonna say earlier that I got, like,
Okay,
sidetracked with
perfect.
too much information. It was about changelings, and this is something we didn't plan for today.
Ooh.
This is just something I've seen recently because, and you'll notice a lot of the, interviews Sarah J. Maas has done recently, she keeps talking about herself being this changeling child that her
She
parents.
does refer to herself like that way a
Yeah,
lot,
she always talks
yeah.
about, like, her parents being, like, non-fiction readers, and then she was this changeling child that liked fantasy and liked Star Wars and liked all these things that, and then they supported her. But it's interesting that she has never explored changelings in any of her books. Now there
Despite
is
that being a very big, like, trope with Faye, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So there has been some suggestions about, could Az be a changeling? Could there be some connection to
Ooh,
changelings with Az
yeah.
and a connection to hell with that? So it's still a very, like, far off theory so far, but it's definitely something that's been suggested and something that I think would be awesome if she explored, because we haven't had changelings in any of her books yet. It's obviously something that she's aware of, and I think some of the art that's on her Pinterest could suggest a changeling, like a changeling child. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where maybe some of these connections are coming in to suggest that maybe in Twilight of the Gods, we might be starting to explore sort of some changelings and things like that as well.
Yeah, like, maybe either he's from hell and got put into ACOTAR world or vice versa. I mean, we know he grew up in, like, a cold and dark kind of dungeony type place. He had to grow up in the dark,
Yeah,
which is why he became, like, with shadows, and that his father was, like, super removed. Like, was his father a prince of hell, right? Did he grow up in some kind of weird pocket realm? Like, was that the dungeon that he was in? Like, hard to say. Um,
exactly. And was
so
it
there
his
there could be a lot
mum
there
or was it his dad that was potentially, the demon? So, I mean,
associated
it
with
would kinda
with
suggest
hell,
it's
right.
dad because of what he did to him, and he says his mum was actually really, really lovely, but there's definitely this big suggestion that he could have a connection to hell, which would be really interesting and exciting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, for sure.
Alright. I think we have one last theory, which is
Mhm.
that you have noticed some really interesting connections between the last page of ACOTAR and the last page of Crescent City 3. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
I have. Now, look, in fairness, this wasn't just me. This was also the girls that I have connected with on
Sure.
Instagram, but they had outlined how similar these two pages are. Now, when we
Mm.
think about this happy ever after that we got with House of Flame and Shadow, it's not a typical, it doesn't feel very happy ever after. We didn't feel good about how it ended. It ended really weird. And if you compare the last page of House of Flame and Shadow to the last page of ACOTAR, they are extremely similar. They really run a very similar course of just sort of saying that they're together, they're going to band together and move on here, and everything's happy. And it also suggests things are nice. But if you put the pages side by side, like if you have a copy of both these books at home, put them side by side and read them, you will notice that they are extremely similar, and that's why I keep coming back to the suggestion that I really think that House of Flame and Shadow is very similar to an ACOTAR one, that we're just getting that first, only very initial taste of the story, and we haven't even jumped into the real story or the real romance, and that's all going to come in the future books. And knowing
Mhm.
Sarah J. Maas, if this is her biggest, which I really think it will be, I really think that this is, like, knowing her obsession with Sailor Moon, potentially with the Stone Mother theory, there is a lot building up to this. Like, if she's basically created Crescent City just as, like, a prequel to her next lot of books,
Yeah.
like, she and I think she's signed for 6 more books now. Has she
I
signed
think
for
it's
6?
6. It's
Eh,
either 6 or 7. I can't
6 or
remember
7.
exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's because she knows that the next lot of books is gonna be like this whole potential Twilight of the Gods. And she is just
Crossover
leading
series.
up to that now. But we are only at the beginning, which is so exciting and so upsetting in the same breath
And thinking how long
because
we have to wait. Yeah.
the truth is, if I think this will be her biggest slow burn, I don't even know if we're gonna get answers to these in the next book. We
We might
might,
not.
but it could take 2, 3, even 4 books. And if she follows Sailor Moon, which I'm going to jump into in the next one, it's a slow burn. Like it's a few seasons before we finally get to the love interest really paying off. There's a lot of like remembering and then forgetting and then remembering again and then things keeping in the way. And I'm just like, oh my God, there has been enough drama. I cannot deal with that. Like I just need I just need like one more book, happy ever after, and then we can just have a few more books of just them being. But I say that, but then I really do want a painful, tragic romance as well. I really do. So,
Right, right. Because it
yeah,
makes it all better in the end when they actually are together. When you get that happily ever after, it makes it better.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But coming back to really think that both these last pages are very similar. Highly recommend you to go and look at them and see what you think. See if you think that they are similar.
Yeah.
And give us your feedback. Give us your feedback.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for everything today, as I say, we've brought this to you, and obviously we're looking at it with the Bryce Azriel connection in mind. You may pick up some differences to that. You may say, yes, I see what you were talking about, but I actually think it's relevant to these characters. And that's totally
Right,
fine.
right,
We love
right.
having a discussion. We love sharing ideas and theories. And I wouldn't be here with this series today if someone hadn't introduced something new and different to me.
Totally.
And that's why I
100%.
love always having these discussions because
Yeah.
you're just going to learn and grow more and have better theories and hopefully know what's going to happen in the next book when it finally happens. So,
Or just, it gives you something to think about while you
yes.
agonize over how much longer it's gonna be before we get the next book, right?
I
That's
do not
really
want
all
to
we're doing.
wait 2 more
Yeah.
years. I'm really banking, guys, with the hints that Bloomsbury have been putting out that we are going to get a book in the next 12 months. Like I'm hoping it's going to be this year. I'm hoping
I
she's
hope
going to
so
do
too.
a Fourth Wing Iron Flame on us and go, boom, guess what? Second book ready
Well,
to
'cause she
go.
was
Actually,
writing it as early as 2022. She was
yeah.
already writing the next ACOTAR book. There was an
And
interview from
yeah.
2022 where she was like, "Yeah, I've started writing it." Now, we know she had to take a break. She rewrote all of House of Flame and Shadow.
Mhm.
Like, she had turned in a draft of House of Flame and Shadow, then she started ACOTAR, the next ACOTAR book, and then she came back from maternity leave and was like, "I'm gonna completely redo House of Flame and Shadow." Did that, but then was back on to the next ACOTAR book by September of last year. So,
Yeah.
it it
Yeah.
it wouldn't be surprise me if it's done.
No. And she said in an interview that she was like doing the draft currently. But if I was an author, I would always undersell myself. Like I would always, because
Oh,
just so I had a bit of
absolutely.
flexibility, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just drafting would equal like, I mean, it's in its final stages. Especially if I
Yeah,
wanted to surprise people and go, guess what?
yeah,
Surprise. I've actually got another
yeah.
book ready to go. And I think publishers are realizing that it's a really smart move for the purposes of selling books to have a book come out in fairly quick succession because it worked
Mhm.
so successfully with Fourth Wing and Iron
Yes,
Flame. So I
and
really
I
mm,
me, Allie, the Taylor Swift fan, I do think that, like, the world has been impacted by Taylor Swift this year, right? She's kind of at this, like, massive stardom
mhm,
level, and the way that she is connecting with fans and her fandom is through this sort of always on content releasing, right? She's always releasing new music. She's always giving teasers. She's always relevant. She's always kind of giving you new Easter eggs and giving you new albums, giving you new music. Even if she's not releasing an album, she's got a new, vault song that she's going to drop out. And I do think that, like, while music and books are different, I do think that, like, the CEOs of the world are paying attention to what she's doing,
yeah.
especially if they're CEOs in the content kind of space.
Oh my
So
god.
I think that they would learn
I'll
from that
take
and be like, "We've gotta
I'll
get
take
stuff out."
anything, guys. If like Sarah J. Maas is like, you know what, I'm gonna release a series of novellas. You're gonna get like little pieces of the book, like for like people. So I'm gonna be like, yes, please, and
I'll
thank you.
give you,
Like
you're gonna get
I
3
I love
chapters
this.
once a
Like
month. I would be so into that.
Because at least then I get a constant drip feed rather than
Yeah,
just waiting for a year to 2 years, kind of forget about the story, then have to reread it all. Like, I'm so
yeah.
emotional right now. I'm still so emotional about this book, even though I've potentially moved on to other reading. I can't let this go. I can't let this go. And this ending is killing me. I need to know what happens next. I need to know where things are at. All we've gotten is the Crescent City side. We have not gotten the other side of this. We need more. And I really hope that we're going to get something in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right, this may be our longest episode yet. We're clocking in at almost 2 hours.
Woo! Love it.
And we've only scratched the surface. We have more coming. So, we hope that you have enjoyed this episode, that you're still listening. If you've made it this far, we really commend you. We have more coming. We have another part, at least one other part. You know, and then we're, you know, we'll keep, if there's another like crazy theory out there that you want us to talk about, let us know. We'll do the research. We'll find the experts. We'll deep dive and then we'll do an episode on it. So, you know, let us know. But we've also got some really exciting author interviews that we're going to be like releasing and publishing over the next couple of months. We can't talk about too many of them yet because they're not final. But, you know, if you liked the Amberly Ash interview that we released, we've got more of those coming,
Yeah.
potentially even bigger authors that we're going to sprinkle into our ACOTAR content or our ACOTAR content. My brain is just like ready for ACOTAR. Our Crescent City content.
And like I just read Butcher and Blackbird. That is
Let's
like,
talk about that.
ooh, that's so
Mhm.
good. So good. We gotta like, yeah, Ali has to read that one. We have to
I
get
have
her
to get on it.
back
Yeah.
on that
I
one.
just have to also I need to find time, you know, because I also have to research and deep dive all
Gotta
these theories.
commit. You gotta commit to the reading. You just gotta do it.
Yeah,
You gotta know when there's a priority.
I know. I know. All right, listeners, thank you so much. We hope you've loved this episode. We hope you've had a great day. Please rate, review, and subscribe. And as always, keep reading.
All right, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.